Her son ordered her a high chair at her own birthday dinner. Evelyn didn't flinch. She smiled while they laughed. By sunrise, Greg's name vanished from the deed, the trust, and every access point he thought he controlled. Monique called it family tension. Evelyn called it a systems update. They raised their glasses to mock her. She rewrote the estate while they were still drinking. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The hostess smiled too brightly as Evelyn Hart stepped through the beveled glass doors of Claret Oak, one of Denver's most aggressively tasteful restaurants, modern chandeliers dangling like jewelry, wine shelves stacked like trust funds. "Mrs. Hart, your party's already seated." Of course they were. Evelyn adjusted her navy trench, nodded politely, and followed the hostess through a maze of linen-draped tables and murmured birthday wishes from younger patrons who clearly assumed she was here for someone else. She always was. The Hart table sat beneath a reclaimed wood light fixture that looked like it had been designed by someone who hated people with astigmatism. Greg, as expected, held court, one arm slung across the back of Monique's chair, the other casually gesturing as he entertained some story involving permits, profit margins, or both. "There she is!" Greg boomed as she approached. "We were starting to think you'd wandered into the knitting club next door." Monique giggled behind two fingers, a glass of Grenache barely touched in front of her. Lila looked up, her expression not so much a smile as a searchlight. "I had a red light that respected itself," Evelyn said dryly, removing her coat. "Imagine that." Greg leaned over the table and flagged down the approaching server. "Can we get a high chair for our guest of honor?" he said, grinning wide enough to flash enamel. "She might slide off the leather." The table erupted. Even the server laughed, quick and automatic, the way people do when they don't know who's really paying. Evelyn's lips curled into the faintest smile as she slipped into the booth seat beside Lila. Her hand ran along the dark wood edge, feeling its weight. "Make it a booth," she told the server softly. "I like seeing the exits." A beat of silence. The server blinked, nodded, and retreated. Lila looked at her grandmother, then back down at her phone. Evelyn saw the flick of something behind her eyes, not pity, not quite, something closer to shared clarity. Monique pulled a glossy bag from the bench beside her and leaned in. "We found something we thought might help you keep sharp." She slid it across the table. A crossword puzzle book, thick, spiral-bound, and styled like a TV remote for the over-60 crowd. Greg thought it was cute. "Did he?" Evelyn said, peeling back the cover. She flipped through the pages once, then closed it and set it beside her water. "That's very proactive." "I figured it beats Sudoku," Monique chirped, sipping her wine. Across the table, Greg had already begun describing some new residential development up in Highlands Ranch, his voice rising in pitch and volume like a PowerPoint left on autoplay. Lila shifted beside Evelyn, her legs bouncing slightly beneath the table. After a moment, she whispered, "Excuse me," and stood. Her cloth napkin fell to the floor as she turned toward the restrooms, her eyes glassy and unblinking. Evelyn leaned back into the booth, the vinyl cool against her neck. She watched her son speak, watched how his words filled space without ever making room. She watched Monique nod like she was keeping tempo. And for the first time in a long time, Evelyn stopped listening. Instead, she reached into her handbag and retrieved her phone. No hesitation, no draft, just a message, short and silent. "Initiate hold-on transfer. Sent to one contact only, Mr. Smith." The server returned with a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc and an awkward smile. "Would you like to make a birthday toast, Mrs. Hart?" Greg chuckled before she could respond, only if she remembers what year it is. Evelyn picked up her water glass. "Here's to exits," she said quietly, and drank. The sky over Highlands Ranch was cloudless and cold, like a page left blank on purpose. Evelyn stepped out of her car, the gravel crunching beneath her flats as she took in the model home's freshly painted facade, white trim, sterile sage siding, black shutters that screamed modern luxury with no memory behind them. The sign out front read, "The Aspen Collection, starting at $1.4 million. She imagined how many corners Greg had cut to get it under cost. He was already waiting by the faux stone porch, arms crossed and trying not to check his watch too obviously. "Hey, you made it," he said, pushing a smile that didn't quite climb his cheeks. "Didn't expect you to drive all the way out here. You hate the suburbs." "I hate bad ones," Evelyn replied, stepping up to the porch, still assessing this one. He opened the door with a flourish, letting her walk in first. Inside, everything was just a little too curated. Too many beige tones, scented candles masking fresh paint, a jazz playlist humming softly through ceiling speakers as if the house were trying to flirt. Monique was already in the kitchen, leaning against the marble island like it had been waiting for her since birth. "There she is," Monique said, bright and brittle. "You're going to love this place. We've already picked out where the Christmas tree goes." Evelyn ran a hand over the smooth cabinetry. Hollow inside. "I assume there's also a spot for the nativity scene," she murmured. Greg laughed awkwardly. "Come on, Mom, don't be like that. We wanted to show you this first. It's gonna be our place. Family holidays, birthdays, eventually." Monique chimed in, gliding past with a tablet in hand. "And we've got something special just for you. Wait till you see the guest nook." They led her down a short hallway into a small alcove with a built-in daybed and a half-size window. A single reading lamp dangled above it like a mercy offering. Monique beamed. "See? Cozy, right? We thought it'd be perfect when you visit." Evelyn stared at the space a beat too long, as if measuring it for air. "Nooks," she said finally, "are for books, not people." Monique's smile faltered. Greg folded his arms tighter. "Look, we thought this would be easier if we made it real. You did say the down payment was a family commitment. That's what we're doing here, building for the family." Evelyn walked back into the main room, her heels quiet on the engineered hardwood. She looked around the pristine silence. This house wasn't built for laughter. It was built for resale. "Do you want to sit down?" Greg asked, gesturing to the leather couch like it was a negotiation table. She opened her purse instead. From inside, she removed a single business card, thick, embossed, clean white with navy text. "Mr. Alan Smith, Estate Counsel." She handed it to Greg without looking up. "He handles my commitments." Greg turned the card over like it might bite him. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I don't discuss contracts with family," she said, her voice soft but unsparing. "That's what lawyers are for." Monique's face tightened. "So this whole drive was a game?" "No," Evelyn replied, adjusting the collar of her coat. "But pretending I was coming to live in a closet? That was a punchline." Her phone buzzed gently in her pocket. She ignored it until she stepped back outside, the cold returning like a verdict. Unlock. One new message. "Lila, you okay?" Evelyn stared out at the nearby construction site, tracts of future homes, all lined up like ambitions that didn't know how to age. She typed back slowly. Still standing, still facing the exits. The safe box clicked open like an old friend who no longer made small talk. Evelyn sat at the dining table in her modest two-bedroom townhome, hands steady, glasses perched low, a legal pad to one side, and a ceramic mug cooling beside it. The sun crawled in through the blinds, slicing the room into neat partitions of light and shadow. She had always preferred paper to pixels, paper remembered. She reached into the steel drawer and began laying each item out with the quiet reverence of a museum curator. One by one. The original deed to the family cabin in Estes Park, sold before Greg's third attempt at a real estate pivot. Her late husband's hand-notated will, still crisp after 20 years. Copies of joint accounts, dormant and humming with passive interest. A sealed envelope marked Lila, open only if I forget who you are. Evelyn exhaled slowly and picked up a manila folder labeled simply, Trust. She tapped the corner against the table, realigning its edges, then set it aside. Not yet. Her phone buzzed, soft, deliberate, a message from Lila. No caption, just 2 screenshots. The first was a group chat between Greg, Monique, and someone named Mandy, assistant. Greg, Mom's slipping, said nooks are for books and wandered off like it was a mic drop. Monique, early dotage is real, should have started her on those memory supplements in the 2000s. Greg, I give it 6 months before she forgets where she lives. Maybe we speed that up? Kidding. Sort of. The second screenshot was just Lila's reaction. No words. Just a silent, electric acknowledgement. Evelyn's face didn't change, but her fingers curled slightly on the edge of the table, as if something sharp had passed beneath her skin. She set the phone down, face up, and rose. In the hall closet was a box she hadn't opened in years. Inside, a tangle of cables, an old Raspberry Pi, a stack of printouts in faded ink, and a plastic Ziploc with a label scrawled in Lila's childhood handwriting, Grandma's Codes, Top Secret. She smiled. It arrived unbidden. A flash bloomed in her mind, 10 years ago, maybe more. Evelyn sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, Lila beside her, wide-eyed and sleepy, the blue glow of a laptop illuminating both their faces. If you can write a function, you can solve a problem, Evelyn said, typing slowly. What's a function? A promise the code makes to you. If you feed it the right thing, it gives you what it promised, like a deal you can enforce. Cool, Lila whispered, holding her breath as her grandmother ran the script. The tiny robot blinked. Back in the present, Evelyn blinked too. She walked over to the kitchen counter and dialed the number from memory. It only rang twice. Doris, she said. Well, if it isn't my favorite submarine, Doris replied, voice gravelly with affection, silent but armed. How's war? I'm updating the revocable trust today. A pause. Then calmly, do it with both hands. And no second guessing. They're laughing at me behind glass, Doris, like I'm already gone. No, honey, Doris said. They're laughing because they think you won't flip the mirror. You're not a burden. You're a legacy. Remind them. Evelyn nodded, though Doris couldn't see it. Her hand hovered over the folder again. Then she picked it up, this time with purpose, and slipped it into her leather satchel. The screen on her phone was still lit. A notification banner slid in from the top. New email, notification of beneficiary change, Smith and Associates. Evelyn's breath caught, but not from surprise. She picked up her mug and took a long, quiet sip. The notary's office smelled like toner and lemon wipes, clean, but not comforting. Evelyn sat upright in a leather chair that tried too hard to feel rich, a manila envelope balanced on her knees like a loaded question. Mr. Franklin, the notary, no relation to Doris, was efficient, quiet, and respectful in the way people get when they sense you're not just old, but watching everything. Initial here, and here, he said, pointing with a matte black pen. She signed once, then again her cursive neat and angled, no hesitation in the strokes. The final signature went at the bottom of the amendment, an addendum that changed the order of disbursement and quietly shifted the entire estate's future. No ceremony, just ink and law. When the stamp hit the page with a dull thunk, Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Done, Mr. Franklin said, sliding the folder back to her. No, Evelyn murmured, rising to her feet. Just started. Outside, the March sun was cold and bright, the kind that made everything look more honest than you wanted it to be. She opened her phone in the parking lot, thumb hovering as a new message came through. Greg, we'll be moving in by June. Hope you're ready for that Nook life. Evelyn stared at the emoji longer than the words. A smirk built like static behind her teeth, but she didn't reply. Instead, she opened the gallery app and scrolled to a photo of her late husband, taken the year before he died. They were at a train station, his arm slung around her shoulder, both holding paper coffee cups and looking off in different directions. him with wonder, her with precision. "You'd be proud of how sharp this pen still is," she whispered, tapping the screen twice to favorite the photo. Across town, Monique sat cross-legged on a velvet ottoman inside the Design District showroom, flipping through a digital catalog on a glass tablet. A salesperson hovered nearby like a well-trained hawk. "This one feels elegant but not too formal," Monique said, zooming in on a chaise lounge with exaggerated curves. "She'll love the shape. There's lumbar support and it doesn't scream senior." The salesperson nodded dutifully. "Guest nooks," Monique continued, "should feel aspirational, not auxiliary." Back at Evelyn's, Doris barged in without knocking, carrying a paper grocery bag and enough attitude to charge rent. "I brought scones," she announced, already toeing off her boots. "And don't tell me you're skipping lunch for legal vengeance. I've done that twice and it only ends in dry mouth and loose ends." Evelyn laughed. "For real this time." "It's not vengeance." "Mm-hmm," Doris said, dropping the bag on the counter. "I called my lawyer too. Figured if you're rewriting your life, I might as well edit mine. Took Larry off the deed. That man couldn't fix a garbage disposal without blaming feminism." They ate standing up, leaning on opposite sides of the island like old generals on ceasefire. Doris eventually left, muttering something about overpriced strawberries and bureaucrats with soft hands. Evelyn returned to her study, where afternoon light fell across the desk like a filtered memory. A stack of files sat neatly in the corner. She reached for the one on top, navy folder, embossed initials in silver, LH. She hesitated, then left it where it was. It didn't belong to her anymore. A half-hour later, Lila let herself in quietly. She'd always had a key, though Evelyn suspected Monique didn't know that. She moved with the slow caution of someone taught not to intrude until she spotted the navy folder, perfectly centered on the desk. Written in careful black ink on a post-it, "Legacy folder. For Lila only." Lila didn't open it. She just placed her hand on top and whispered, "Okay." The call came at 8:12 a.m., sharp, like a warning bell. Evelyn had just finished steeping her morning tea when her phone buzzed with Mr. Smith's name flashing across the screen. She didn't flinch. She walked it calmly to the window, sunlight leaking through slatted blinds, casting long lines over the rim of her mug. "Evelyn," Mr. Smith began, no pleasantries. "I believe you're about to get a very interesting phone call. Just wanted you to hear it from me first." "Go on," she said, sipping once, never moving from the window. "Greg attempted to use the Evergreen property as collateral for a refinance," he said, "apparently to cover a second loan tied to that Highlands Ranch development." She inhaled, slow and quiet, letting the warmth of the tea run counter to the chill rising in her chest. "Problem is," Smith continued, "he listed himself as the legal owner. Title search bounced it. That LLC we moved the property into 3 years ago, still active, still private, still yours." Evelyn allowed herself one blink. "He really thought I'd forgotten I was clever." Smith let out a dry chuckle. "If you'd like, I can send him the updated deed, or let the bank handle it." "Let the bank educate him," she said. "It'll stick longer that way." And with that, she hung up. 20 minutes later, the text thread in Greg's phone was alive with panic. "Greg," 7 unread. "Call me now. This is serious, Monique. The refi didn't go through. They're saying the property isn't mine. What the hell is she playing at? We showed them the folder with the estate stuff last year. Monique?" At that moment, Monique was in her home office, a robe sliding off one shoulder, scrolling through pending orders on a furniture vendor app. A chaise, a custom rug, a $3,600 Italian recliner she told herself Evelyn would love, even if it never got unwrapped. Greg burst in without knocking. "She sandbagged us," he snapped. "The Evergreen house isn't in her name anymore. It hasn't been for years." Monique's brow furrowed. "That's not possible. She literally gave it to you." "No, she talked like she did," he said, pacing now. "But on paper, it's in some LLC, shielded, airtight. My name's nowhere near it." "So fix it," Monique hissed. "Get it back, reverse it." Greg stopped pacing. "I can't." It was never mine to begin with. The silence that followed stretched and broke. Monique stood, robe falling fully from her shoulders now, forgotten. "You mean we leveraged air?" she said. Greg ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know how she did this, how she even thought of it." "She was a software engineer for the Department of Defense," Monique snapped. "Not a birthday clown. Of course she thought of it." She moved past him, straight to her laptop, typing hard. "You need to get her on the phone. You need to tell her we need that house." Greg exhaled, already knowing how that would go. Still, he pulled up her number, hit call. Voicemail. He tried again and again. The third time she answered, not with a greeting, just silence. "Mom," Greg started, voice tight. "I know what you did. You're sabotaging our future. That property was never yours," Evelyn said, voice low and immovable. "You gambled with something you didn't own. You lost. That's not sabotage. That's gravity." "You don't get to rewrite the rules just because you're old." Evelyn chuckled, not kindly. "I didn't rewrite anything. I only erased what you never had." Click. Later that night, Evelyn sat on her patio beneath a wool blanket, Lila beside her, sipping cocoa and saying nothing. The stars above were spare and sharp. Somewhere in the distance, wind shook the bare branches like bones against the sky. "You look lighter," Lila finally said. Evelyn didn't reply. She just reached for her phone, opened a folder marked Asset Firewall, and began typing. The cafe was new, one of those minimalist Denver spots that looked like a Pinterest board threw up on polished concrete. Soft jazz murmured from speakers hidden behind industrial pipes. The baristas wore canvas aprons and expressions of detached superiority. Evelyn chose a table in the back corner, facing the door, naturally. She arrived 15 minutes early, she always did. Sliding her phone under her scarf on the table, she tapped a button. The screen lit up, red dot glowing. Recording started. The device looked off, passive, just a grandmother's forgotten phone. Evelyn took a slow sip of chamomile and waited. Monique arrived precisely 7 minutes late, wearing oversized sunglasses and forced warmth. "Evelyn, so glad you could meet." Evelyn gestured to the opposite chair without a word. Monique sat, placed her oat milk latte beside her phone, and smiled as if they were two girlfriends catching up before yoga. "So," she began, crossing her legs and adjusting her jacket. "I know there's been some confusion, missteps maybe, but Greg and I wanted to make sure there were no hard feelings." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Did you?" Monique leaned forward slightly, voice lowering like she was about to offer a secret recipe. "You've always been the sharpest person in the room, but, well, lately Greg's been worried, and look, I'm not saying it's time to panic, but you've seemed foggier." Evelyn didn't blink. "I mean, forgetting property transfers, moving money around, just saying maybe it's time to delegate some of the more complicated responsibilities, financially, medically, emotionally. There are forms we can help with, just to take the pressure off." Evelyn took another sip. "And assign that delegation to whom?" "Well, ideally Greg, of course. Family should handle family things." There it was. The play, the soft con. Monique reached into her purse and pulled out a brightly colored brochure. Pastel gradients, calming fonts, a smiling older couple on the cover. "Your future, simplified, aging with dignity." "Just something to consider," she said gently, sliding it across the table. Evelyn reached into her own bag, slowly, deliberately. She withdrew a plain white envelope, no branding, no flourish. She placed it next to the brochure. "This," she said, "is for you." Monique hesitated before opening it. Her smile strained as she read the single printed page inside. Effective immediately, Monique Hart is removed from all emergency contact listings, durable POA access, and trusted medical advisories associated with Evelyn M. Hart. This action is irrevocable and documented with the state registry. Monique looked up, stunned. "Wait, what is this? You're cutting me out over a misunderstanding? Evelyn stood, wrapping her scarf around her neck like armor. It's not a misunderstanding, Monique. It's pattern recognition. You don't mean this, Monique said quickly, standing too. Greg will be furious. This affects both of us. Evelyn smiled, soft and deadly. You should be more careful what you say over lattes. Monique blinked. Excuse me? Evelyn reached under her scarf, tapped the recording off, and slipped the phone into her pocket. Surveillance, she said coolly. Works both ways. She walked out without another word, coat swinging behind her like punctuation. Back at the table, Monique stood frozen, the brochure and letter side by side, untouched coffee cooling beside them. Her phone buzzed in her bag. A text from Greg. Greg, bank's frozen the bridge loan. Evelyn's got someone inside. Her hands trembled as she picked up her cup, only to realize it had started to spill. The front door of Greg's Tudor-style home opened before Evelyn even knocked. Monique stood there with a forced brightness that didn't reach her eyes. Well, don't you look sharp, she said, stepping aside. Evelyn stepped in, coat draped over one arm, a slim black portfolio tucked under the other. I always dress for the weather, she replied. Forecast called for frostbite and performance. Inside, the house was perfumed with brunch smells, maple bacon, cinnamon waffles, something citrusy trying to mask tension. Lila was already seated at the table, quietly refilling glasses. Greg moved between the kitchen and dining room like a host in a commercial, shirt pressed, voice dialed to generous son. Glad you could make it, he said, pulling out a chair for Evelyn. Thought you might be mad about the refinancing stuff, just a misunderstanding. Evelyn offered him the kind of smile you reserve for people who wave in mirrors. I don't hold grudges, she said, sliding into the seat. I notarize boundaries. She placed the black portfolio on the table, neatly between her place setting and the fruit salad no one had touched. Brunch began with clinking silverware and Monique's strained attempts at small talk. Evelyn let it all happen. She let them fill the air with noise because she knew what silence could do. And when the pancakes were cooling and the momentum finally stalled, she unzipped the portfolio. I wanted to share something, she said, voice calm but undeniable. Not a toast, just a transition. Greg looked up, wary. Evelyn unfolded a single document and laid it on the table, a signed, notarized affidavit. Lila leaned slightly forward, eyes narrowing to read. I've finalized my move, Evelyn said. A tech-assisted retirement cooperative in Boulder. I'll have autonomy, privacy, and more bandwidth than this house has grace. Greg scoffed. A co-op? Seriously? That's not exactly a family plan. Evelyn didn't blink. It's not a plan, it's a correction. Monique straightened. So, you're leaving us? Evelyn turned to her, measured. I'm reclaiming space. You can call that leaving if you'd like. But no, I'm not running. I'm redesigning. Lila stood and walked over, arms wrapping around Evelyn's shoulders. She leaned in close and whispered just loud enough for her to hear. Is this your exit plan? Evelyn smiled at her granddaughter's familiar warmth and whispered back, No. It's my first chapter without edits. Greg threw his napkin onto the plate, voice sharp now. So this is it? You abandon family, disappear into some coding compound, and expect applause? Don't confuse presence with participation, Evelyn said, rising slowly, deliberately. You made this house look full. That's not the same as making it feel like home. Greg opened his mouth, but Evelyn cut her eyes to Monique. And that includes you, she said, even. Monique said nothing, only tightened her grip on the champagne flute she hadn't sipped from since Evelyn arrived. From across the room, Lila's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then looked at Evelyn. You should see this. Evelyn raised a brow. What is it? Lila turned the screen toward her. A forwarded email from an anonymous source. Subject line, Hart Development. Inquiries from the Colorado Licensing Board. Greg Hart slammed the phone down hard enough to rattle the mug beside it, splashing lukewarm coffee onto a folder labeled Evergreen Property, Appraisal Packet. Nullified? He muttered, pacing in socks across the hardwood. How the hell is it nullified? From the living room, Monique called out flatly, "If you break another mug, we're not buying more. I'm done decorating disasters." He ignored her. His phone buzzed again. Another email from the bank. Due to unresolved ownership issues and unverifiable collateral, your mortgage application has been formally withdrawn. Further attempts may impact credit rating. Contact Equifax for inquiries regarding recent score adjustments. Jesus Christ. He clicked open the app. His credit score had dropped 86 points in 2 days. Greg rubbed a hand over his face, eyes bloodshot from a night of poor sleep and poorer research. His office, once a showroom of confidence, was now littered with crumpled notes, legal printouts, and empty La Croix cans. "You said she transferred the house," Monique snapped, entering the room now in leggings and a hoodie too clean for the rage in her eyes. "You said it was ours." Greg spun. "It was. She made it look that way." "No, Greg," she snapped, voice rising. "She made you look that way, like a fool." He flinched. She never raised her voice, not unless she'd decided she was safer angry than afraid. "She's dismantling this brick by brick," Monique said, pacing now. "First the property, then the contacts, and now the licensing board. You're a developer without credibility." Greg grabbed his phone and scrolled to Evelyn's number. "No," Monique said, watching him. "Don't go groveling. That's what she wants." Greg looked at her like a man already half drowned. "I'm not groveling. I'm clarifying." He hit call. Across town, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, laptop open to her password vault. Rows of assets, digital keys, and encrypted folders blinked back at her. She was halfway through transferring her crypto wallet to Lila's oversight when her phone buzzed. Greg. She let it ring twice before answering. "Mom," Greg said too quickly. "I think we need a meeting of the minds here. Something's gotten way out of hand." Evelyn said nothing. "I know we've had friction, but I'm trying to be rational. You've made some bold moves. Okay, but you've got to know this affects all of us. The refinancing, the LLC, now the licensing board sniffing around." Still silence. Greg softened his tone. "Let's just talk. Face to face. No lawyers. You always said clarity was the cornerstone of fairness, right?" Evelyn stirred her tea. "You had your meeting," she said calmly. "You made your choice." And hung up. That afternoon, Doris arrived unannounced, a grocery tote over one shoulder and a Tupperware of split pea soup in her hand. "I brought anti-anxiety vitamins," she said, dropping the bag on the counter. "They're called carbs. Eat up." Evelyn laughed, exhausted but light. Doris raised an eyebrow. "So, he's unraveling?" "Thread by thread." "Well," Doris said, pouring herself water, "they underestimated the fire in your marrow. Happens when people mistake grace for surrender." Evelyn closed her laptop. "He tried to call it a meeting of the minds." "That boy never understood your mind," Doris said, sitting beside her. "He just resented its sharpness." They ate soup in silence, the kind of silence that says, "We've earned this peace." Later that night, Lila received an encrypted message. Subject line, "Your inheritance, digital keys to begin transfer." The email had one line of text. "When they ask what I gave you, tell them I gave you back time." Lila stood in the center of a sparsely furnished studio, sunlight streaking across concrete floors and sleek assistive tech consoles. The walls were still bare, but the place felt alive, with promise, not pretense. Evelyn's tech-assisted cooperative in Boulder wasn't just a building, it was an ecosystem. Residents coded in the lounge, traded AI ethics podcasts over lunch, and ran encryption tutorials between water aerobics and memory games. Lila set her duffel down gently, like she was placing a flag. Her fingers lingered on the strap. There was no going back, not emotionally, not legally. That afternoon, she met Evelyn and Mr. Smith in the co-op's legal suite, an office disguised as a solarium, its corners filled with plants and subtle power. "This is just a formality," Mr. Smith said, handing Lila a blue leather folder. "Your grandmother made her intentions clear months ago. We're just sealing them in law." Lila flipped through the documents. Her name now appeared as sole medical power of attorney, successor trustee, authorized signatory on Evelyn's estate, digital and physical. She signed in a steady hand. Evelyn watched quietly, chin lifted, eyes glassed but steady. "No second thoughts?" Lila asked. "None," Evelyn said. "Second chances, maybe, but never second thoughts." The ink was barely dry when Chaos rang the buzzer at the front desk. Monique, dressed in all black, lips tight, heels too loud for the linoleum. She stormed past the startled receptionist, brandishing her phone like a warrant. "I'm here to speak to my daughter," she snapped, "and my mother-in-law, if she still remembers who I am." Lila stepped out from the hallway like a wall. "This isn't your house," she said, calm as static. "And I'm not your audience." Monique's breath hitched. "So you're just, throwing away your whole life? For what? Some legacy fantasy? You live under my roof." "Correction," Lila said. "I lived under your rules. There's a difference." Evelyn entered behind her, serene in her soft gray cardigan and pearl earrings. She walked to the communal tea station and poured herself chamomile, hands precise. "You raised me to smile at disrespect if it came with brunch reservations," Lila continued. "You laughed at her, mocked her, tried to erase her value for your convenience." "Don't rewrite history." "I'm not," Lila said. "I'm rewriting my part in it." Monique's voice pitched higher. "You're betraying your family." Lila's gaze didn't flinch. "You laughed at her like she was less than human." Evelyn stirred her tea once, set the spoon down. Then gently, she placed the cup on the marble table between them. She smiled. "Now I'm laughing," she said, "with my air." The air shifted. Monique turned red, then white, then something shapeless. Footsteps approached. Mr. Smith stood at the edge of the room, manila envelope in hand, a document peeking out with a familiar state seal. "Ms. Hart," he said to Monique, "per legal directive, you and your husband are no longer permitted to contact Ms. Hart, either of them, without representation. A protective injunction has been filed with the county." Monique blinked. "You can't be serious." "Oh," Mr. Smith replied, "I'm meticulous." "Not theatrical." He handed her the envelope. As she stood frozen, Lila stepped back into Evelyn's shadow, not to hide, but to anchor. "Leave," Evelyn said softly. Monique did. That evening, Evelyn and Lila sat on the patio of the co-op, warm blankets over their legs, laptops open but untouched. "You okay?" Evelyn asked. Lila nodded, staring at the horizon. "I didn't just move out. I stepped in." Evelyn touched her hand. "And that makes all the difference." The files stretched across Evelyn's dining table in an architecture of truth. Bank statements, quarterly reports, donation receipts, decades-old email threads printed and hole-punched, some pages yellowed, others freshly inked. Together they formed a pattern, not a smoking gun, but something colder, slower, a siphon disguised as obligation. Evelyn wore her reading glasses low on her nose, highlighter in hand, sipping ginger tea as if this were just another night in a long, technical career. Across from her, Lila typed with quiet focus, eyes darting between spreadsheets and her voice memo app. "Grams, this line from 2018, your name was used on a foundation grant application Greg submitted?" Evelyn didn't look up. "Without my consent, he added me as a silent legacy partner so he could inflate donor credibility. Check the disbursement trail." Lila tapped a few keys. Funds routed to a shell holding, then transferred to Hart Development's escrow account. 3 months before they bought that second model house, Evelyn said softly. "He always needed my name, never wanted my presence." Mr. Smith had looped in a forensic accountant the week prior. Now Evelyn had more than suspicion. She had sequence, wire transfers, duplicate signatures. Greg hadn't just failed as a developer. He'd funded his ambition with quiet theft from the only woman who ever trusted him without proof. Doris arrived with no fanfare as usual, kicking the door shut with her boot while balancing a pizza box and a flash drive. "I brought dinner and the good stuff," she announced. "Cheese for strength, malware logs for clarity." Lila perked up. "Wait, you ran diagnostics on Greg's email server?" "I taught middle schoolers how to erase browser history before homeroom," Doris said, smirking. "Of course I did." They gathered around Evelyn's laptop. The flash drive revealed archived chats from a subcontractor group chat, Greg boasting about family-backed liquidity and ghost fund padding. One message, time-stamped 6 months ago, simply read, "If the old lady croaks this year, we can finally cash out right." Evelyn didn't flinch. She just closed the file and stood. "I think it's time we stopped documenting and started prosecuting." The next morning, Evelyn and Mr. Smith met with a state-appointed Elder Services liaison in a sleek, glass-paneled government building. Her affidavit was 32 pages long, bound and tabbed. Mr. Smith had cross-referenced everything, no conjecture, only fact. When she signed the complaint, her pen barely trembled. "You're not just defending yourself," Doris said later that afternoon as they filed copies for state records. "You're rewriting the terms of respect. For all of us." Meanwhile, in Lila's room at the co-op, audio gear lined the desk. A single mic, foam panels. Her laptop screen displayed the title slide of her senior media project, Episode 1, Inheritance Isn't Ownership, The Evelyn Hart Tapes. She hit record. "My name is Lila Hart, and this is the story of how one woman's silence was mistaken for surrender, until it wasn't." Greg's phone vibrated during a meeting he wasn't fully listening to. The subject line froze his blood. "Colorado State Licensing Board, Preliminary Review of Heart Development." He opened it. The words hit like falling steel. "Your license is currently under review for procedural fraud and disclosure violations. You are instructed to cease all new contracts until the review is complete." Across the table, his assistant asked something he didn't hear. Greg stood slowly, walked into his office, and closed the door. He tried calling Evelyn again, voicemail. He didn't leave one. The email came at 6:41 a.m., just as Greg was pouring his first coffee, black, bitter, unearned. Subject, urgent, withdrawal from Highland Summit Project. From Devon Realty Partners. To Greg Hart, Hart Development LLC. Greg. Due to recent publicity and pending licensing board actions, our firm must withdraw from the Highland Summit investment. We cannot risk capital on uncertain legal standing. This decision is final. Devon R. Gregg read it 3 times before slamming his fist into the countertop, splintering his ceramic mug. Coffee soaked the paper trail of what was supposed to be his comeback: spreadsheets, architectural renderings, laminated sales maps. From the hallway, Monique's voice echoed flatly. "Another investor or the last one?" He didn't answer. Couldn't. He stared at the seat across from him. Empty. Across Boulder, Evelyn adjusted the lapel of her blazer and glanced over her note cards one last time. The event hall at the co-op buzzed with quiet anticipation. Residents, university guests, tech journalists with badges that read press in sans-serif arrogance. A projector glowed with the title slide, "Dignity by Design, Building Systems That Protect, Not Patronize." Keynote by Evelyn M. Hart. When her name was called, the applause was modest but full. She walked to the podium without hurry, silver hair catching the light like threads of metal. "Good design," she began, voice steady, "doesn't begin with innovation. It begins with empathy. It begins when we ask not just how we can make people more efficient, but how we can make them feel seen." Lila recorded from the front row, eyes shining. Doris sat beside her, mouthing along to phrases she'd already heard in kitchen rehearsals. The audience leaned in, not just polite, but engaged. Evelyn concluded with a quiet authority that demanded nothing, but received everything. "I spent my career writing code," she said. "Then I spent my retirement learning which lines could be rewritten and which were always mine to author. Dignity isn't gifted, it's remembered." The room rose to its feet. Later, in the rec lounge turned after-party, Doris clinked her iced tea against Evelyn's cup and handed her a handmade award, cardboard wrapped in foil, stuck into a foam base. "Presenting," Doris announced with mock grandeur, "the Golden Firewall for lifetime achievement in not being screwed over after 60. The crowd laughed. Evelyn held it up like it was glass. "Least likely to be manipulated into oblivion," Doris added with a wink. Lila leaned over from her chair. "Do you ever regret it?" Evelyn paused, eyes distant for a beat. "Only that I waited this long to stop shrinking." That night, Evelyn sat in her apartment, wrapped in a wool shawl, the room dim except for the soft glow of her laptop. A file folder labeled Brunch Year 75 rested on the desktop. She clicked play. There it was, the video footage from the high-end restaurant. Greg's voice, amplified by entitlement, echoed, "Can we get a high chair for the guest of honor?" The laughter, the server's awkward chuckle, her own smile, small and tight. She watched it all without flinching. Instead, she leaned back, reached for her tea, and whispered, "They built a punchline. I rebuilt the ending." Then she hit delete. Not to forget, but because she didn't need proof anymore. The knock came just after 3 o'clock, precise and rehearsed, as if Greg had practiced it on the way over. It was neither timid nor aggressive, just controlled, the kind of knock that said, "We've decided this will go well for us." Evelyn stood in the kitchen, slicing lemons for her afternoon tea. She paused, set the knife down carefully, and glanced at the door. She already knew who it was. Outside, Greg stood with a tight jaw and shoulders too square for sincerity. Monique hovered half a step behind him, dressed in a pastel blouse and clutching a bouquet wrapped in wet grocery store cellophane. Her eyes were shielded behind oversized sunglasses, even though the porch was shaded. "We were in the area," Greg said when Evelyn opened the door. His voice carried the kind of warmth that came from a script, not a feeling. "Wanted to stop in, say hello? Maybe talk." Evelyn looked at the bouquet but didn't reach for it. "Of course you did." After a long pause, she stepped aside. They entered the sitting room like strangers visiting a museum of someone else's life. Greg took the armchair he used to claim during holiday visits. Monique perched on the edge of the couch, posture delicate, as if any shift might trigger an alarm. Evelyn did not sit. Instead, she remained standing near the mantel, her hands clasped loosely in front of her, a folded document tucked beneath one palm. "We just want to clear the air," Monique said, carefully smoothing her slacks. "There's been so much distance, miscommunication, and we're not proud of how things unfolded. But family is family, right?" Greg leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "We've had time to reflect. We don't want things to stay like this. We came to make peace." For a moment, Evelyn said nothing. She simply watched them, as if deciding whether to let the performance play out to intermission or bring down the curtain early. "I'm glad you came," she said finally, her tone even. "Because I've prepared something for you both." She walked slowly to the coffee table, retrieved the folded document, and handed it to Greg. He unfolded it with a flick of his wrist, skimming the title page. "Terms of Reentry. Conditional access to Evelyn M. Hart's estate, medical decisions, and personal affairs." His brow furrowed as he flipped to the second page, and Monique leaned over to read. Clause 1 required that both Greg and Monique complete a full year of verified individual and joint therapy with a licensed family trauma specialist, no exceptions, no substitutions. Clause 2 outlined financial restitution, calculated down to the cent, for the misappropriation of Evelyn's assets, adjusted for inflation, interest, and legal consultation hours. Payment would be due within 90 days of agreement to the terms. Clause 3 demanded a written and publicly available acknowledgement of emotional harm and elder manipulation, signed and submitted to the Colorado Office of Adult Protective Services, with a copy sent to Evelyn's attorney. Clause 4 reminded them that re-entry was not a right, but a privilege, one governed not by obligation, but by earned trust. By the time Greg reached the final page, his hands had curled the paper into a ridged half-cylinder. "This isn't forgiveness," he muttered, eyes narrow. Monique let out a dry laugh, short and sharp. "This is delusion. You've completely lost your mind." Evelyn raised her chin, voice calm but final. "Number, I've just stopped losing time." Greg stood, tossing the document onto the table like it had insulted him. "You think this fixes anything? You think a few pages of demands make you righteous?" Lila, who had been quiet until then, stepped into the room holding her phone, not in conversation, but in playback mode. The sound of Greg's voice filled the room, unmistakable and captured. "If the old lady croaks this year, we can finally cash out right." Then came Monique's soft, complicit chuckle, followed by silence. "These recordings are admissible," Lila said, her voice low but controlled. "They're also backed up. So if you're thinking of challenging anything legally or narratively, you should be advised. We're not afraid of evidence anymore." Monique paled. Greg's face twisted, but the fire behind his eyes had dimmed. Neither of them said another word. They simply turned and left, the door clicking shut behind them like the last line of a paragraph no one wanted to read again. That evening, as the light faded across the foothills, Evelyn and Lila sat in the sunroom, the scent of chamomile and lemon hanging in the air. Outside, the trees bent gently in the early spring breeze. Lila finally spoke. "Do you think they meant it, coming here?" Evelyn gave a faint smile, neither bitter nor forgiving. "They meant to get something. That's different from meaning to change." The notary's pen moved slowly, deliberately, across the final page as the spring light filtered through the large windows of Evelyn's co-op conference room. The air carried the scent of printer ink, fresh lilies from the front desk, and a sense of finality too dense to name. Mr. Smith sat beside her, reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, checking each line with quiet precision. He had brought 2 copies of the irrevocable trust document, one to file, and one for Evelyn to store in her digital vault, right alongside the rest of her code-base credentials and carefully indexed instructions. Across the table, Lila sat with her hands folded, a silk scarf looped at her neck in a way that reminded Evelyn of her own mother, a woman who had understood dignity even before the world offered her any. "Everything looks in order," Mr. Smith said, sliding the folder forward. "Once you sign, this becomes permanent. No reversals, no appeals. The full trust passes exclusively to Lila, estate, digital rights, and medical authority." Evelyn didn't hesitate. She uncapped her pen, signed her name, and exhaled slowly. Lila looked over, startled not by the act, but by the expression that followed. Evelyn's face didn't show relief exactly. It showed arrival. They left the office in silence, the trust documents now sealed in legal permanence. Outside, the tulips were starting to bloom in neat, data-like rows along the walkway, rows Evelyn herself had coded into the co-op's landscaping schedule when she moved in. It felt fitting. Even flowers, when nurtured, respected the architecture of timing. Later that day, Evelyn sat in the lounge by the atrium windows, dictating the final parameters of a separate document. Her voice, clear and firm, echoed into the transcription software as Lila watched from across the room. "I, Evelyn Marie Hart, do hereby allocate 30% of my remaining estate to the Aurora Initiative, a permanent scholarship fund for women in technology with priority given to those over 40 returning to STEM careers, because a late start is not a lesser one." Lila blinked rapidly and looked away. Mr. Smith sent the confirmation within the hour. The fund was registered, the assets earmarked. It was done. The next morning, Evelyn found herself sitting under soft studio lights, facing a young news anchor with gentle eyes and a hesitant smile. A local PBS affiliate had requested the interview after hearing whispers about Evelyn's trust structure, the podcast, and the family dispute that had left legal scholars buzzing behind closed doors. She had initially declined, then reconsidered. "Some are calling this an act of quiet rebellion," the anchor said, nodding at the notes in her lap. "Why now?" Evelyn took a moment, not to think, but to feel the full weight of the question. Because I am still very much now, she said, her voice neither defensive nor performative. People treat the elderly like we've been filed under past tense, but I have agency, intelligence, and rights that don't expire just because my hair has. The interview aired that evening. Within 24 hours, the clip went viral across elder rights advocacy circles and tech mentorship platforms. And somewhere, in the upper-level office of a downtown Denver law firm, Greg Hart sat across from a junior associate reviewing potential options for litigation. "She moved everything," the associate said, flipping through a folder of LLC documents. "The property, the accounts, even the digital assets. They were never under her personal name when you tried to leverage them. That LLC is structured like a maze. There's nothing to seize." Greg's face flushed. "So she just wins?" "She was never in the game you thought she was playing," the associate replied. "She built a different one and locked the doors." Greg stood without thanking him. Outside the office, the city pulsed around him, unmoved by his urgency, unbothered by his unraveling. That night, Evelyn received a message from her attorney's office. Hart Development LLC officially dismissed its suit. No legal grounds. Case closed. She read it once, then archived the email. Across from her, Lila sat curled into the couch with a notebook on her lap. She had been writing ideas for the next podcast episode, but paused when she noticed Evelyn watching her. "You okay?" Lila asked. Evelyn didn't speak for a long moment. Then she looked out toward the trees beyond the glass wall and said quietly, "I think I've finally stopped editing myself." The lights in the archive room were soft, indirect, designed to reduce glare, to make even the most complex documents feel readable, understandable, human. Evelyn sat at a modular desk beneath a skylight that tracked the slow progress of morning into afternoon. The desk was scattered with USB drives, a collapsible scanner, old patents folded like origami, and code printouts annotated with red pen margins that looked like they were fighting for space between invention and revision. One by one, she fed pieces of her life into the scanner. The blueprint for a biometric locking algorithm she had drafted in '93, her old Department of Defense code notebooks, even the patent filing for a wireless encryption protocol that had been laughed out of the room at the time, only to be rebranded by someone younger, louder, and male 5 years later. Lila sat beside her, laptop open, typing labels as each file uploaded. The project was called Inheritance of Mind, a digital vault, protected by multi-factor encryption, and set to go live with open access the moment Evelyn's estate settled. It wasn't just a collection, it was a refusal to vanish quietly, or to be footnoted by people who had no idea what she had built. "You were doing two-factor authentication before it was even a buzzword," Lila murmured, scanning the metadata on a 1997 draft spec. "I was doing integrity," Evelyn replied softly. "They just gave it catchier names." The scanner beeped. Another document complete. At noon, Doris swept in with her usual grace-by-force energy, carrying a chilled bottle of champagne, 2 glasses, and a bag of cheddar popcorn. "Don't argue," she said, popping the cork with a celebratory twist. "You've done it, Evelyn. You're unforgettable. And not just because you coded like a prophet and lawyered like a scalpel, but because you made the damn table when they wouldn't offer you a seat." Evelyn smiled, not with pride, but with the relief of someone finally understood without translation. They toasted in the silence of shared history. Later that evening, Lila uploaded the newest podcast episode. She had titled it without Evelyn's input, intentionally. "When They Laughed at My Grandmother," Episode 4, The Joke That Didn't Age Well. She recorded the narration in one take. "My grandmother was brilliant before they were ready to call her that. They laughed at her logic, mocked her clarity, and tried to clip her competence by labeling it eccentricity. But brilliance doesn't dim. It archives, and now I'm uploading it, all of it." She clicked publish. Within 6 hours, the episode was trending on 3 different platforms. By the next evening, it had sparked a storm of discourse across Reddit threads, digital humanities forums, elder advocacy sites, and women in tech groups. Messages poured in from listeners. some with aging parents, others with mentors forgotten too early. Hashtags emerged: #, inheritance of mind, dignity by design, grandmother clause. Evelyn didn't read the comments, but she heard Lila's laughter echo from the hallway and knew it was good. The next day, Evelyn's phone rang. She saw the name before she touched it. Greg. She pressed answer. No hello. For 10 seconds there was only breath on the line. Then his voice, cracked at the edges. I don't even know what to say anymore. Evelyn didn't interrupt. You buried me, he said finally. Digitally, legally, socially, congratulations. Still, she said nothing, not because she had no words, but because he had spent years never hearing the ones she gave. She had run out of loans. He would have to live with the silence. She ended the call without a sound. That night, as stars pulsed gently behind the skylight, Evelyn walked back into the archive room. The last file had finished uploading. The dashboard read, 100% complete. Lila stood nearby, holding a printed copy of the access log. You've built something no one can erase, she said. Evelyn nodded once, pressing her palm lightly to the surface of the desk. Then let them try. She turned off the scanner, closed the lid on the laptop, and looked toward the hallway where Doris was already uncorking another bottle. But before she walked away, Evelyn reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. Label for Lila. Open after final episode. She didn't say a word, just slid it onto the top shelf of the archive. The light overhead dimmed, and the room exhaled as if even the walls understood. Legacy, at last, had gone digital. The late afternoon light cast long golden lines across the backyard courtyard of the co-op, turning the bricks warm and the shadows gentle. Evelyn had arranged the space herself. No caterers, no formality, just folding tables covered in linen, mismatched ceramic dishes filled with peach tart and lemon thyme finger sandwiches, and a pitcher of something sparkling and slightly bitter. The invitation had gone out quietly. No RSVP, no agenda. Just a note tucked into each mailbox that read, I'd like to sit with you a while. Lila arrived first, her laptop bag swapped for a small bouquet of sunflowers and a linen-wrapped tin of almond cookies. You set this up yourself? She asked, eyeing the symmetry of potted herbs and the soft arc of fairy lights strung above the yard. Evelyn nodded, a smile tugging at one corner of her mouth. I like to build things that outlast the moment. At the far edge of the courtyard stood 2 handcrafted wooden chairs, sturdy, smooth, lightly stained. The grain glowed in the light like an old secret finally spoken aloud. I built those too, Evelyn added, gesturing toward them. Maple, no nails, all joints and time. Doris arrived next, flanked by 2 residents from down the hall, carrying a folding table and a cake in the shape of a floppy disk. Because of course I made tech nostalgic, she declared. You're lucky I didn't bring a fax machine piñata. By 5:30, the courtyard was full. Neighbors milled around with lemon spritzers. Lila sat at Evelyn's side on one of the chairs, carefully unwrapping a slice of tart. The community buzzed with quiet joy, the kind that doesn't need music to feel like celebration. As the last of the sun slipped behind the mountains, Evelyn reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a small, sealed envelope. She handed it to Lila without ceremony. Only open when you need reminding, she said. Lila ran her thumb across the seal, then tucked it into her tote bag like it was something sacred. You're not like other grandmothers. Evelyn turned her gaze toward the crowd, toward Doris balancing paper plates, toward the elderly man trying to explain crypto to a woman wearing orthopedic Crocs, toward the fairy lights flickering on like old memories returning with better context. Good, she said at last. Other grandmothers never got their apology aired on public radio. Lila chuckled, leaning her head lightly against Evelyn's shoulder. The podcast hit 500,000 streams this morning. They're talking about it in ethics seminars. I don't need their curriculum, Evelyn said. I just needed my name uncurled. Doris clinked her glass of Prosecco against a ceramic mug someone had filled with iced tea. 2 high chairs, she announced, her voice ringing out clearly. Low blows and higher standards. The crowd laughed. Some clapped. Someone near the mint planter shouted, "Hell yes!" And someone else added, "About damn time." As twilight deepened, Evelyn sat quietly beside Lila, the last of the golden light brushing across her face. The evening had become what she had hoped for, not triumphant, not vengeful, just real. A closing chapter written in her own pen, on her own terms. She reached for her drink, cool, floral, fizzed just right, and took a slow sip. The laughter folded around her like wind through tall grass. Then, almost to herself, but loud enough to be heard by the woman beside her, Evelyn murmured, "They wanted me small." She looked up at the horizon, where the sky cracked into dusk, where shadows met light and didn't apologize for the overlap. "But I was always the architect,"